Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, we're diving into a topic that might hit a little too close to home for some of us. Have you ever been at work, staring at your computer, and just had this nagging feeling deep down that what you do doesn't really matter? That if your job just vanished overnight, the world would keep spinning just fine? Well, if you have, you are definitely not alone. So let's get into this incredibly common, yet rarely talked about, feeling of professional pointlessness.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the feeling itself, this idea of a pointless job. Then, we'll get into the pretty explosive bullshit jobs theory and the main counterargument, which is that it's all just something called alienation. After that, we'll look at some really surprising new evidence from the US. And finally, we'll ask a much bigger question. What if the problem isn't just your job, but the whole system of work itself?
All right, let's start with the symptom. That widespread, gut-level feeling that our work is just missing a sense of meaning.
I want you to just take a second and ask yourself this, honestly. Does the stuff you do every day, your daily grind, does it actually add up to a meaningful contribution to the world? It's a really tough question, I know, but it's right at the heart of everything we're exploring today.
And the sheer scale of this feeling is kind of staggering. A YouGov poll in Britain discovered that 37%, that's right, 37% of working adults think their job makes no meaningful contribution at all. We're talking more than 1 out of every 3 people feels like their work is pointless. This is not some small niche complaint, this is like a modern epidemic.
So, what's the deal? How do we explain this? Well, that brings us to a very bold and pretty controversial theory about the nature of a lot of modern jobs.
The late anthropologist David Graeber, he really didn't pull any punches. He came up with this explosive idea that this feeling of uselessness, it isn't just in our heads. He argued that literally millions of us are employed in jobs that are, for all practical purposes, objectively pointless.
So Graeber came up with a formal definition for what he called a bullshit job. It has a few key parts. First, it's a paid job. Second, it's so completely pointless or maybe even harmful that, and this is the real kicker, the employee themselves can't even justify why it exists. They know it's useless.
But you have to wonder, why would these jobs even exist in the first place? Well, Graeber pointed his finger at a system he called managerial feudalism. He argued that modern companies are often way more focused on just extracting wealth and value rather than actually creating anything new. And this leads to these massive, bloated management structures, just layers and layers of roles that are only there to make the people at the top feel more important.
He even broke these jobs down into a few categories. You've got jobs that, he claimed, exist just to make a boss look good or feel important. Then you have jobs that might even be actively harmful, like some roles in corporate law or finance that make a few people rich but maybe hurt society overall. And then there are the managers whose primary role seems to be just creating more pointless tasks for everyone else to do.
Okay, but is a job being objectively useless the only possible explanation? This brings us to the main counter-argument, and really, the central debate we're digging into.
See, the other major theory says the problem isn't the job itself, it's the experience of doing the job. This idea suggests that even really useful work, like being a teacher or a nurse, can be made to feel totally meaningless if the working conditions are terrible. This is what's known as the theory of alienation. And researchers say this feeling of alienation comes from 2 main places. First, the way modern work is chopped up into tiny, repetitive tasks. If your whole job is just one little step in a giant assembly line, it's super easy to lose sight of the final product and your role in it. And second, something I think we can all relate to, just plain bad management, having no say in what you do, or a toxic workplace that just drains the meaning out of any task.
So let's put it side by side, because this is the key difference. Graeber's theory says the job is actually objectively pointless. The alienation theory says the job just feels pointless because the environment is bad. So is the problem with the whole economy creating useless roles, or is it just bad bosses and toxic workplaces ruining otherwise meaningful jobs?
For years, this debate has just gone back and forth. But not long ago, a really interesting study came out that put both of these theories to the test in a whole new way.
A sociologist named Simon Wallow decided to do a super deep dive into the American Working Conditions Survey. His whole goal was to use this massive amount of data from all across the US to see if he could find any real statistical proof for Graeber's theory, the alienation theory, or maybe both.
Now, this is a really big deal because earlier studies, mostly from Europe, hadn't really found much evidence to back up Graeber's ideas.
But Graeber's whole theory about managerial feudalism was really aimed at big, financialized economies like the United States. So this was kind of the perfect battleground to test it out.
And the result? It was pretty shocking. Wallow's paper came to a really clear conclusion. I'm going to quote it directly here. This article finds robust support for Graeber's theory on BS jobs. I mean, wow, that was a huge moment in this whole debate.
So what did he find exactly? Well, Wallow discovered that even after you account for all the things that cause alienation, like bad bosses, boring tasks, having no freedom, if you worked in one of the jobs Graeber pointed to, like finance or marketing, you are still way more likely to feel your job was socially useless. It turns out, Graeber's predictions actually held up under intense scientific analysis.
Okay, so the evidence suggests these BS jobs are a real thing, but that finding kind of opens the door to a much bigger and maybe even more radical critique of modern work itself.
You see, Graeber's theory isn't just about a handful of bad jobs here and there. It taps into this growing feeling that the entire way we've set up work might be broken. It forces us to ask, what is the actual point of the 9 to 5?
And this can lead to an even more extreme view. A commentator named Tom Scrylius puts it really bluntly. He argues that modern work is basically a form of wage slavery, where our chains are invisible and we just trade our freedom for survival. If you look at it from this angle, the whole system is built to keep you dependent. You've got rent, you've got bills, you've got debt. It all makes sure you have to keep showing up to work, trading most of your waking hours just to get by. And people who believe this argue that the 40-hour work week was never designed for our well-being. It was engineered to squeeze maximum productivity out of us for our employers. So when you put it all together, maybe that nagging feeling of pointlessness, maybe it isn't just you. Maybe it's not even just your specific job. Perhaps it's a totally rational reaction to a system that often seems to care more about profit than it does about human contribution, and more about keeping us dependent than setting us free. And that leaves us with one last, really challenging question to chew on. If a job is totally pointless, but it pays the bills, who's really got the problem? The worker for taking that job, or the system that creates jobs like that in the first place? It's definitely something to think about. For more videos like that, subscribe to my YouTube channel and turn on the notification bell so you will be notified when we upload new videos in the future. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye.